People often speak as if goods simply appear because somebody wants them badly enough. Welcome to another video based on the book What People Get Wrong About Economics, a guide to the core concepts, by Library of Ideas. Today I tell you about supply and why every product, service or convenience around you carries hidden costs long before it reaches your hands. Imagine ordering dinner through an app late in the evening. A few taps, a confirmation sound. 40 minutes later, someone arrives at your door with warm food packed neatly in paper bags. Simple. But behind that moment sits a long chain of effort. Ingredients grown somewhere else, workers cooking under pressure, drivers paying for fuel, rent for the restaurant, electricity, equipment, insurance, time. Supply is never just having things available. It is the willingness and ability to produce and offer something at a given price, despite all those costs, risks, and limitations. And that changes how markets look completely. Because every time people demand more of something, someone else has to decide whether responding is actually worth the effort, whether the price covers the sacrifice required. Nothing enters the market for free. Not food, not housing, not energy, not even convenience itself, despite modern civilization training humans to believe delivery apps are some kind of natural law. Dublin. A grey morning with cranes already cutting across the skyline. In one neighbourhood, estate agents' windows are covered with red stickers. Prices climb month after month. Radio hosts keep talking about a housing shortage. Newspapers repeat the same phrase again and again. Huge demand. Patrick hears all of it while driving between construction sites. He runs a small building company, nothing glamorous, a handful of workers, 2 vans, thin margins. The kind of business where one bad decision can quietly eat a year of work. As he passes an empty plot near the canal, he starts calculating. At first glance, it looks like an opportunity. But before a single shovel touches the ground, the problems begin lining up. First, the land itself. Negotiations, upfront money. Then planning permission, forms, meetings, delays. Sometimes objections from neighbours who want housing shortages solved somewhere else, preferably far away from their own street. Weeks become months. Patrick still needs contractors, materials, workers, financing. The bank wants a business plan before approving a loan. Interest rates are higher now than they were last year. While he waits, the costs keep moving. Steel becomes more expensive. Wages rise. New safety regulations appear. Rumours spread about tax changes. From the outside, the shortage seems simple. People want homes, prices are rising. But the response is never instant. Between seeing demand and delivering new flats stands time, paperwork, capital, uncertainty and risk. The need is obvious. The answer forms slowly. The reaction usually comes quickly. If prices are rising, just build more. To most people, that sounds completely obvious. If many people want flats, construction companies should increase production. And if they do not, suspicion immediately appears. Developers must be holding back. Authorities must be incompetent. Somebody must benefit from scarcity. The story feels simple. More buyers should lead to more construction. More construction should lower prices. Problem solved. A clean, straight line. More demand, more supply. And when reality does not move that quickly, frustration fills the gap. Greedy developers, lazy councils, artificial shortages. Human beings are extremely talented at inventing villains whenever systems move slower than emotions. But this neat explanation skips over something essential. Building is not like turning on a tap. You cannot create apartments overnight because newspapers start shouting about rising prices. Concrete does not pour itself. Skilled workers do not appear instantly. Land does not magically reorganize itself around a new project. Between the signal and the response stands cost, paperwork, financing, uncertainty, and time, sometimes years of it. The intuitive story is too smooth. Reality moves far more slowly than demand does. The focus shifts again. Supply is not a matter of mood. It is not about whether builders feel generous or ambitious this week. It is a decision made under uncertainty. And here the word appears properly. Supply. Supply means the quantity of goods producers are both willing and able to offer at a given price. That willingness rests on calculations, not emotions. What will the land cost? How expensive will labor become? What about steel, concrete, energy, insurance? Will buyers still pay these prices 2 years from now? What happens if interest rates rise again? What if regulations change halfway through the project? Access to capital matters too. Without financing, even the most confident developer cannot move forward. Expectations matter. If Patrick believes prices may fall before the flats are finished, hesitation becomes rational. Risk matters constantly. If one failed project could bankrupt the company, caution stops being cowardice and starts becoming survival. Patrick does not build simply because people want homes. Desire alone is not enough. He builds when he believes the final sale will cover the costs, repay the financing, and compensate for the risks taken along the way. And all of this has to be judged before the buildings even exist. That is what makes supply different. It is forward-looking. A decision about the future made with incomplete information, uncertain conditions, and the uncomfortable knowledge that reality rarely respects business plans. Supply moves with delay. When prices rise, the response does not appear instantly. It takes time to organize land, labor, materials, permits, and financing. And by the time a new block of flats is finally completed, the conditions that inspired the project may already have changed. Supply is shaped constantly by costs. If wages rise, the calculation changes. If steel becomes more expensive, the calculation changes again. If energy prices jump, projects that looked profitable last year may suddenly become fragile. Regulation matters too. Zoning rules, safety standards, environmental requirements. None of these are abstract ideas floating inside policy documents. They directly influence what can be built, how quickly it can happen, and how expensive the process becomes. And behind all of this sits risk. Every producer commits resources today in exchange for an uncertain return tomorrow. If tomorrow disappoints, losses follow. Some goods react much faster than others. You cannot double the number of trained doctors in a week. Training takes years. You cannot produce advanced microchips overnight. Factories require enormous planning and investment. And vineyards do not suddenly grow faster because wine prices increase. Nature continues following its own timetable, no matter how loudly markets complain. Every product has its own speed of adjustment. The more complex the production process, the slower supply usually responds. And this is why prices can remain painfully high long before additional supply finally arrives. The signal comes immediately. The response does not. But delay and cost are not the whole story. Supply can also be restricted deliberately. Planning rules can freeze land for years. Licensing systems can limit who is allowed to build, produce, or even practice certain professions. A dominant company may keep output low to protect profits. Governments may block imports or favour specific firms through regulation and policy. And when that happens, the question changes completely. Is the shortage caused by genuine limits of time, labour and resources, or is it created by the structure of the market itself? If only a small number of companies are allowed to operate, supply may stay tight even while prices rise sharply. If regulations become so complicated that smaller firms cannot realistically enter the market, competition weakens. If approvals take years, even capable builders begin hesitating. So supply is never just a technical reaction to prices. It is deeply connected to institutions, laws, property rights, administrative systems, market structures. All of these shape how quickly producers can respond and how much they are able to produce. Sometimes scarcity reflects real physical constraints, and sometimes it reflects the rules humans built around the system itself. Which is awkward, because societies often blame the market for outcomes created partly by their own institutions. Humans do enjoy constructing mazes and then acting surprised when movement becomes difficult. This tension matters enormously, because not every shortage is natural. Some shortages are designed, protected, or quietly maintained by the framework inside which markets operate. From a wider angle, the pattern becomes clearer. Demand says, "We want this." Supply answers, "At what price and with what risk?" That distinction changes how we interpret rising prices. A higher price does not automatically prove greed. Sometimes it reflects rising costs, uncertainty, delays, or the difficulty of expanding production fast enough. Shortages do not always mean producers are indifferent. Often they mean adjustment is slow, expensive, or risky. This also explains why political promises about increasing supply sound much simpler than they really are. Announcing more housing, more doctors, or more energy does not magically bring them into existence the next morning. The response depends on incentives, financing, labour, resources, regulations, and expectations about the future. And expectations matter enormously. If producers believe future conditions will worsen, they hesitate. If they expect stability and profit, they move forward. Supply is built on that forward-looking logic. The assumption is simple. If a project offers enough return, producers proceed. If it does not, they step back. But reality is never perfectly neat. Not every actor cares only about profit. Some pursue power. Others seek security, political influence, or strategic advantage. Governments may distort incentives. Institutions may weaken or redirect market signals. So supply simplifies reality too. But understanding it prepares us for the next step. Because price is where demand and supply finally meet. And that meeting point reveals how these two forces constantly push against one another, shaping the world people live in every day. Months pass before anything visibly changes. Then one morning, cranes rise above the Dublin skyline. Fences appear around the empty plot. Lorries begin arriving with concrete and steel. Patrick walks across the site wearing a hard hat, checking schedules, speaking with foremen, watching the foundations slowly take shape. From a distance, it finally looks like action. Something is happening at last. New flats will eventually appear here. New doors, new kitchens, new sets of keys changing hands. But not today. While the building climbs floor by floor, prices across the surrounding streets remain painfully high. Newspapers still talk about shortages. Radio callers still complain. For families searching for a home this month, almost nothing feels different. The city looks much the same as before. Only now, if you look carefully, you can actually see the process unfolding. Time passing between signal and response. Risk being absorbed. Money committed in the hope that the future will justify the decision. That is what supply really looks like. Not a burst of emotion, not an instant reaction. A calculation stretched across months and years, made under uncertainty by people trying to predict a future nobody can fully know. Which is slightly absurd when you think about it. Entire skylines shaped by guesses about tomorrow. And by the time the first tenants finally move in, the decision that made the project possible will already belong to the past. Patrick never builds because people complain loudly enough. He builds because prices send a signal that the risk might finally be worth taking. That is the deeper lesson hidden inside supply. Every product, every service, every new building represents resources committed today in the hope of a future return. Labour, materials, time, financing, uncertainty. None of it arrives without cost, and none of it responds instantly just because demand rises. Here is the thought to carry forward. Supply is not an emotional reaction to need. It is a calculated response to incentives under uncertainty. And once you understand that, rising prices begin to look different. Sometimes they reflect greed, sometimes scarcity, sometimes regulation, sometimes genuine limits of time and production. But prices themselves are not moral verdicts. They are signals. Signals carrying information about desire, scarcity, cost, risk, and expectations about the future, all compressed into a single number. In the next episode, we finally arrive at the point where demand and supply meet. Price. Not as a judgment about what things deserve to cost, but as a signal moving through the entire system, coordinating millions of decisions between strangers who will never meet.
If what you have just watched made you pause and think, that was the intention. This film is only one chapter from a much larger story. The book it comes from explores 34 of the most misunderstood ideas in economics. It began as something personal. A father trying to explain the world to his teenage daughter. Why prices rise. Why some societies prosper while others struggle. Why good intentions often produce unexpected consequences. The film shows only part of the picture. The book goes further, with additional chapters and ideas that never appeared in the series. If you would like to explore the full journey, What People Get Wrong About Economics is available now on Amazon. The link is in the description below.